Welcome into episode 77 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm Nicholas Raba.
A couple of weeks ago, we hit a list of 5 stories with big implications. Stories that individually weren't big enough for a whole show of their own, but that were big enough that we wanted to make sure that you knew about them. You'll never guess what we're doing this week. Yes, we're at it again. A bunch of stories that really seemed big enough, important enough. One I know we actually sort of glossed over a few weeks ago, but want to get a little bit more in depth on that. Items on today's list: Strava fitness tracking troubles, the handling of Intel's Spectre disclosures, the Grammarly Gaff, MacUpdate pushes a Mac Trojan, and finally, something new for phishers: fake bribes. Now, this is the story that I was talking about that we sort of glossed over a couple of weeks ago. We actually mentioned this first story, the secrets leaked through Strava.
Yeah, this is kind of a fun story.
Fun is a funny word.
Yeah. So as tech has gotten smaller, it's led to sort of a fitness revolution. Sensors and GPSs on watches and phones can tell us so much about our workouts. From information about our heartbeats to exactly how fast and far we went on a walk or run. Of course, that means a lot of personal data collection, and that's where our Strava story starts. The Strava app uses GPS location services built into your device to track where you work out, mapping the route you run or walk. Strava even lets you share those maps with other Strava users. The idea is to design runs you like, then share them with others. Kind of neat if you know who you're sharing with, and kind of neat if you want to see where others are actually running. In secure locations, though, this could be an issue. Late last year, Strava started posting a heat map made of all the activities their many users had logged. Basically, they were laying user maps over other user maps. Now, high heat areas are those with a lot of logged activity. The result was a really neat global image showing how hard lots of people worked out, where they worked out, and when they work out. Lots of people use Strava, including, as I mentioned earlier, people in secure locations. It turns out lots of U.S. servicemen and women use Strava while working out on their bases or deployment. These ended up on Strava's heat map. So basically, workouts were showing the potential locations of some sensitive U.S. military bases and forward operating positions. When the soldiers on the ground worked out and logged it with Strava, it all went into the heat map. Information soldiers would never share intentionally was being collected, mapped, and posted online. Now, Strava has since apologized, and they say they plan to work with the military to make sure nothing like this happens again.
This was one of the weird implications in this story to me, because there were the I can't believe nobody thought of that stories where it was like there's just vast desert and then this one area that was just full of workouts in the middle of a place that nobody, would have thought about. And so that one is an obvious security risk, but it's weird to think about. There was one thing where they said, okay, everybody knows that this is an army base, or everybody knows that this is a posting, and they know roughly where it is, but they've never been on the base exactly, so they don't know where different things are, like barracks and things like that. Looking at these maps, one of the security people who covered it actually said, yeah, you can actually see this is where the workout begins and this is where the workout ends, so this is probably the barracks. This is probably where people live. And then you're like, oh, well, that's sort of an interesting thing to know. But then, of course, you're thinking, well, if I'm a bad guy, it's very interesting to know where people sleep.
Yeah, and you think about even with the map data, they certain locations don't get mapped, or it doesn't look like the way they actually look. So it's just more of an insight into something that they don't actually want shared.
And this is, we used to say almost every show, back up your data, back up your data, back up your data. Something I don't think we've said nearly as much, but probably is the kind of thing we ought to think about more going forward. Read the fine print, right? I mean, these are the kinds of things that people may have been doing without even realizing, which, I mean, that's just a thing. It's like I've talked about on iTunes forever, on Mac OS Ken. I mean, you download new software. It's from, a company that you trust. You click the thing that says you've read the end user license agreement, but you haven't read the end user license agreement. You've just clicked OK.
Because nobody would ever put anything bad in there.
Right. Well, and the Strava thing's not bad either, except, of course, it ended up doing something that people didn't expect it to do. I mean, it's possible that a lot of the people that were generating these heat maps didn't even realize that was a feature that Strava had, let alone that they were contributing to it.
Yeah.
We've got another item on the list, and this is a big one that we've approached it a couple of times. First of all, we did a show about it, although this is less about the thing and more about how they reacted to the thing. Intel's Spectre and Meltdown disclosures, specifically Spectre. Now, for people who don't remember what those are, they were a couple of ridiculously huge vulnerabilities that are still kind of hard to get our heads around, I think. Or at least it's hard for me to get my head around it. A quick recap from the site meltdownattack.com. Meltdown was the one that breaks the most fundamental isolation between user applications and the operating system. This attack allows a program to access the memory and thus also the secrets of other programs and the operating system. Now, Spectre breaks the isolation between different applications. It allows an attacker to trick error-free programs which follow best practices into leaking their secrets. In fact, says meltdownattack.com, the safety checks of said best practices actually increase the attack surface and may make applications more susceptible to Spectre. Now, that is a very basic idea of what those two things are, and if you want to know a lot more about it, well, meltdownattack.com is a good place to go, but we also covered Spectre and Meltdown on episode 73 of the checklist. We're less talking today, though, about the vulnerabilities and more about the disclosure itself.
Yeah. The flaws were originally found and reported to Intel in June 2017. While they started working on fixes right away, nothing was said to the public due to the seriousness of the flaws. Intel had planned to release information on the flaws on January 9th, but preparations for the announcement were so big that word got out, and Intel had to go public earlier than planned. Now, I said fixes were in the works for a while. Intel did tell some major players about the flaws long before the public release, but the chip maker did not tell the US government. Who they did tell were a number of big business partners, including some companies based in China like Lenovo and Alibaba. Now, Intel says they told the companies to get help in developing fixes, but it does seem unusual that no one in the U.S. government was told. In fact, several agencies, including the NSA, said they first heard about the flaw when the story broke in the media. This is all, pretty dicey. Intel is a U.S.-based company, and the U.S. government is one of the company's biggest customers. Government agencies rely a lot on Intel-based products for highly critical and sensitive intelligence and operations. Telling Chinese commercial partners and not telling the U.S. government, it seems like it's an odd choice. While agencies such as the NSA don't have the best track record with security vulnerabilities, the government does advise tech companies on how to respond to certain threats. It's likely the government would have wanted to help mitigate Spectre since it leaves U.S. operations just as vulnerable as systems outside the U.S. Maybe Intel wanted to keep the flaw from being exploited by governments, but that could still happen. With the level of monitoring that goes on in China, it's very likely that when Intel told Chinese companies about Spectre and Meltdown, the Chinese government learned about them as well, long before the US government was told. Intel's handling of the whole situation has opened at least as many questions as it's answered.
Do you think we'll ever get the new questions that were generated answered?
No, I think it's going to be one of those untold stories that just keeps on unraveling with more and more questions.
Yeah, there are little bits and pieces. There are little things that happen that you're like, well, that's odd. But definitely not to get political. I will say the news cycle these days is so frantic that if there's a story that you just can't believe, wait 5 minutes. It's like every next news story says to the previous news story, hold my beer.
So did we ever figure out about the Experian hack? I mean, there was a lot of questions about that one too.
Yeah, right. Seriously, last year between Experian and Spectre and Meltdown, I mean, it really feels like somebody should be coming to your house saying, "Tell you what, we're just going to take all of your electronics and give you all new electronics," because I feel certain that would be completely trustworthy as well. Yeah, I would love to know what the answers are on the Intel thing, but I don't know. Well, like we just said, who knows if we ever will know them all.
You got to submit those requests, the Freedom of Information Act and all that stuff. You could get the answers for us.
Yeah, I could do that. It'll be great because I'll have an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that will smell like so much like magic marker, because I would imagine 95% of it would be redacted. But you know, that's just my guess. Up next, the Grammarly Gaff. I don't remember this one. What happened with Grammarly?
Well, for people who don't know, let's first start with what Grammarly is. Grammarly is a website and a browser extension that checks your documents and text as you type to make sure your grammar, punctuation, and so on is proper. If it finds a problem, Grammarly highlights it and gives you suggestions to make your writing better.
That sounds like a keylogger. I'm sorry, I mean a keylogger that does something for you, but it sounds like a keylogger.
Well, you know, it's nicely helping you out, monitoring things.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a bad guy keylogger. I mean, it's not secret. You're signing up for Grammarly, for crying out loud. But I mean, it's got to be looking at everything you type to let you know whether what you're typing is correct.
Yeah, and some people might be okay with that if Grammarly was keeping that log safe. Tavis Ormandy, a researcher we've talked about before, uncovered a bug in the Google Chrome Grammarly extension. Ormandy found out that Grammarly wasn't safeguarding its authentication tokens. Those are what software uses to verify that you are who you say you are, and you have the permissions to access services and data that no one else should have access to. Grammarly didn't protect its tokens. In fact, it exposed them to every single website you visited. With those tokens exposed, a malicious website could have taken the authentication token from your Grammarly extension and used it to log in as you to the Grammarly.com website. That would give the attacker access to your uploaded documents, files, and your overall history with the service. Initial reports indicated that the bug could expose not just your documents, but everything that you've typed overall, no matter the website. The good news is Grammarly has fixed the issue, and there's no indication that anyone's information was compromised. Still, it was out there for the bad guys to steal. Now, this is a good time to think about browser extensions. There are tons of vulnerable plugins out there. Some are useful, and not every extension is shady, but really, don't install millions of extensions on your browser. You probably don't need them. Additionally, take a close look at reviews and other information before you accept the installation. While the Grammarly problem took a trained eye to spot, it is easy enough to ask yourself, do I really need this, before installing an extension. Same goes for other add-ons for other devices. Think about keyboard apps for your phone. Questions there to consider: what information do they store? What do they do with that information? And how do they keep that information safe? When you give software access to your devices, you're opening a big window into your life. Be careful that you're not opening every window and leaving them open and unattended. Also, be sure to keep the extensions you do use up to date. so that when issues do arise, you could take advantage of security fixes as soon as they become available.
Is that... Well, I mean, that wouldn't have helped the Grammarly thing, right? Except that... I mean, that's sort of a best practice across the board. Like, just make sure that you have everything up to date all the time. And then you wouldn't even necessarily have to know about the Grammarly thing. It's just, as soon as they found out, they'd be like, oh, no. And so then they go ahead and fix it. And if you're in the habit of updating your stuff, then it'll already be fixed.
Exactly.
Speaking of updating, and along the lines of the Grammarly Gaff, MacUpdate was hacked to push a Mac Trojan.
Well, hacked or social engineered or... Yeah. Well, here's the thing. If you use Apple software or apps purchased through the Mac App Store, updates are easy. They're pushed through the App Store. A little indicator shows up on your App Store app. You hit update, you're done. If you have apps from outside the Mac App Store, keeping your software up to date requires a bit more work. A lot of people with a lot of apps have turned to sites like MacUpdate, which gather updates into one place for easy download and installation. Of course, that also makes it an excellent place for bad guys to insert bad apps. In early February 2018, exactly that happened. Not for the first time. MacUpdate pushed the newest type of Mac malware to users who thought they were downloading updates for programs like Firefox, Onyx, and Deeper. Onyx and Deeper are programs for customizing the way your Mac looks and works. Firefox updates are often critical, closing security loopholes and keeping users safe. All three apps made good targets for the hackers to switch things around and try to fool users into downloading their malware, which is now named Creative Update. The way it worked was straightforward. The hackers changed the download link on MacUpdate to make it look like the downloads came from legitimate URLs. Instead, they were linked to malicious hosts. The file users downloaded were just regular disk images, and it would go through the installation as usual. Instead of installing a legitimate update, though, users were installing malware that also ran a dummy copy of the program in question, or tried to. In some cases, it launched the wrong software altogether, giving users a clue that something was actually going wrong. Now, the malware's goal was to mine cryptocurrency by stealing CPU resources from the user. It's not a new tactic, and it's not likely to go away anytime soon. The good news is that MacUpdate fixed the issue quickly, restoring proper links and updates, but this highlights the risk of relying on third parties to get your updates. Sites like MacUpdate have to keep themselves appropriately locked down. Now, while Creative Update was pretty weak and poorly implemented in terms of Mac malware, a more sophisticated attacker could have done a lot of damage. Overall, we suggest that you try to rely directly on developers for updates. Watch what you download and install carefully. If something seems out of the ordinary, run your security software or contact your vendor. Any action is preferable to potentially letting a crypto miner or Trojan run freely on your Mac.
Remind me where you guys are on... Like, would you personally rather just see everybody buy everything from the Mac App Store and be done with it? Or how do you know when you go out there? Should it just be relying on reviews online? I mean, what's your take on where you download your apps overall?
Well, you know, in these apps in questions, it was the users' comments that kind of led people to get this issue noticed. Altogether. So they say for every person who leaves a comment or submits an email or support ticket, there's however many other people who experienced the same problem but didn't get around to doing any of it. So the reviews, the comments, things like that are definitely useful, but use your intuition as well. I mean,
let me ask, general consumer though, like you're sending your mom out to buy software online, right? Do you just tell her to go online and find something, or do you say go to the Mac App Store and do something?
Well, the Mac App Store is definitely where people jump to right away. So many people used to go to Apple's download site, and when they closed that down and migrated people over to the Mac App Store, that was just the go-to way for it. But, some developers haven't moved over to Apple's platform because of restrictions, what the apps can and can't do, because they don't like the percentages that are taken. They see more money-making opportunities to do it on their own website. But as far as entry-level users, that's generally where they go first. Mm-hmm. And then where else do they get their software? They probably see an ad online. They probably are, being advertised to, clicking the links, and then that's when you really need to use your best practices.
Do you have a particular site that you turn to or do you have one that you suggest for people who, I saw this about this online and it looks pretty good, but I'm going to go to, I don't know, CNET, or I'm going to go to, XYZ. Is there a particular site that you think they tend to be fairly trustworthy to let you know whether something's on the up and up?
MacUpdate by far is the best download repository that exists there. CNET, their download.com, they have a lot of non-updated software on there, last I checked, and even the way ads are displayed on the pages, it gets a little bit tricky. Users are clicking the wrong download buttons because it looks like the download button they're looking for, and then they just happen to be installing whatever advertisement is being pushed towards them. So MacUpdate has a cleaner, more friendly interface to it, and
you just have to keep an eye on what's going on.
Yeah, and their admins and moderators, they're pretty quick to it. Now, if you were to email download.com, I don't know who would see that email first. You'd probably want to reach out to the security department because download.com is CNET, so you probably have to go through a whole bunch of contact forms and figure out exactly where it's going, whereas MacUpdate still has that ma and pa feel to it where your emails are getting answered pretty darn quick.
As big a deal, as big a resource as download.com may be for you, bear in mind it is a tiny little division of CBS. So, yeah, I get what you're saying. It's not that the people there aren't doing good work, and it's not that the people there aren't trying to do good work. But MacUpdate is about updating the Mac, whereas download.com is about a tiny part of CNET, which is about a tiny part of a very large media organization. So,
oh man, everybody gets bought up and conglomerated into one. And
yeah, I'm holding out for my Disney money, dude. I'm looking forward to being purchased by Disney. No question. Let's see. Last item on today's list, phishers and fake bribes. Are you telling me that I can't trust the guy who writes to me and says he's offering me $10 million if I'll just give him, last four of my social?
I'm sorry. My phone rang this morning, and it was from a Washington, D.C. number. And I answer it, and it's a robot talking to me. It's telling me that it's Officer Boyer with the IRS.
They're hiring robots now.
I got one of the IRS calls. It was... I tried to get my other phone to start recording it or press the star or button to get it to repeat the message again, but it didn't actually connect me with anybody, and there was no way to connect me with anybody. It wanted me to call a different phone number.
And of course you did, and now everything's taken care of, right?
Yep. Now I have no more tax problems.
Yeah, none of that is true. Please, everybody. None of it. Well, I'm sure it's true that you got the call, but no. Don't follow the instructions. But let's actually get into what we have here. So fake bribes.
Yeah. Well, typically phishers are looking for a way to trick you into giving up account information for all kinds of accounts. They usually do this by pretending to be a service provider or somehow tricking people into thinking they're speaking to a legitimate business. These attacks typically use fear or intimidation to panic users into handing over info. We took a look at the phishing schemes back in episode 37 of the checklist. Now, the latest rounds of phishing scams is different. The new trick has scammers offering people cash. In known cases, the phishers have pretended to be representatives of AT&T and the Internet Crime Compliance Center, or IC3. IC3 is a government task force that helps people who's been defrauded through digital actions. In both cases, the phishers send an email or call a victim to initiate contact. In the case of the IC3 scam, users were told that they were entitled to some money because an internet fraudster was arrested. For the AT&T scam, some customers got calls telling them that they were going to receive a bill credit due to service outage. People who respond to the IC3 scam probably got further requests for personal information that the scammers could then use to access their accounts. It would eventually play out like the typical Nigerian prince scam, stringing someone along with promise of lots of money if they just share the right information. Now, the AT&T scam is even more serious, as victims were apparently targeted in more of a spear phishing attack. Callers already had a lot of information on their victims, making it seem like they really did work for AT&T. They told the victims that to receive a bill credit, all they had to do was tell them an SMS code that they'd soon get as a text message. In actuality, the bad guys were trying to bypass the victim's two-factor account authentication. The code they received was actually a two-factor authentication code. The attacker could then punch in the code, gain control of the user's account information, and terminate the call.
Really quickly, so we should remind people what spear phishing is. So phishing is just sort of like I send out 1,000 emails hoping that somebody's going to respond to it. Think about it like casting a net as opposed to going after a particular fish, right? Spear phishing
is you already know some information about the user.
Right. Okay. So then the 2FA thing, I mean, you would have to know a decent amount about them. So I know that you, Nicholas, rob a bank at Trader Joe's Bank, which is pretty sure not a bank, but I know you bank at Trader Joe's Bank, and I have enough information to almost get into your account. But you're smart, and you've set up 2FA. Mm-hmm. But now I've got you on the phone, and I say, so I'm going to send you this code, and you're going to read that code back to me, and that's going to verify that you're you, which it actually is doing, but it's doing it for your bank account without you realizing.
Yeah, so if the person isn't reading the full message, or if the message is just a simple, the two-factor authentication code,
right?
They're being social engineered, like, hey, we're not going to ask you for your bank password. Never give that out. What we're going to do is we're going to send a secure message to your phone to make sure it's actually you, and you just read that code back to me.
Right, which, honestly, I see where that would make sense to someone. The problem is they initiate the call, not you. There are a few problems. Obviously, they have other ways of doing that without the 2FA thing. But I can see, combined with the fact that you're saying that you're an expert, or combined with the fact that you're saying that you're, an authority, or that you work for the company or the organization, that does have an air of legitimacy to it.
And when has AT&T ever given anybody money back for their bill?
Well, credit going forward, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah, you definitely just need to be cautious with what type of information that you're giving, and when things seem too good to be true, or you have that fear that if you don't do one thing or another, it's probably time to step back from it all and go, I'll get back to this later. Some phishers have even taken to impersonating victims in person, going to mobile phone stores and requesting to port numbers to a new service. In this way, they hope to directly intercept two-factor notifications and take control of users' bank accounts and other information. If you receive a suspicious email or phone call, not only should you not give out any information, you should report it to the authorities as well. It could help in the efforts to actually shut down the phishers. Phone number porting is a more significant issue and one we may need to touch on in a later show. It incorporates elements of both phishing and social engineering and became so severe that Verizon and T-Mobile both pushed an alert to customers to warn them about the scam.
What's weird to me about that one is that's a scam that almost seems to happen without my being there, right? I mean, I don't see how there's much I can do about that one. I'm sitting here talking to you right now. If somebody is at, I'm going to use a carrier that I don't use, Blue Mountain Wireless. If somebody's at a Blue Mountain Wireless store saying, yeah, I'm this guy and I need you to port my number, I mean, that can all happen, while I'm sleeping. That can all happen while I'm, off on a picnic or doing something else. I guess what I'm wondering about it, you say Verizon and T-Mobile pushed out alerts warning customers of this scam. This actually seems more like something that has to happen on their end, right? I mean, to make sure that the people working at their carrier stores, or golly, the guy who's working at the Walmart, sort of kiosk, and not even at a carrier store, just, somebody who handles phone information. It's really more incumbent on them to make sure that their employees are making sure that I go through all the hoops that I need to prove that it's me so that I can go ahead and port my number.
Oh, indeed. But it's kind of one of those make the information out there. So if you do receive the email or the alert on your phone and go, wait, something's up. Something isn't right here. Somebody's trying to access my account.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of just puts you on alert to start with.
Just like the last time we did a grab bag mixed potpourri show, that is a ton of information about a ton of things, but we do want to make sure that you can get more information on any one that appeals to you. The place to do that is our website, securemac.com/checklist. Look for the show notes for episode 77. Hey, maybe you're interested in stuff that happened on episode 76, or maybe even episode 4.
Oh, that was a good one.
The point is, there are notes. 4 was. We might have peaked at 4. I don't want to say that. I also don't think it's true. The point is, there are actually notes for every episode we've done so far. All kinds of topics, things you might want to refresh yourself on, or if you know somebody who's new to the Mac, maybe you've got a family member who keeps falling for certain things or keeps stumbling on certain issues. Lots of resources there. securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.